Welcome to the PricePlow podcast. We are honored to have Gary Millet of Axcess Global and l-bhb, Ketone Labs, Real Ketones, the whole gamut here. This is episode 138, and this is a continuation of episode 131 with Rob Rogers that we did before one of the Expo West mornings. So, Gary, thanks for joining us here. I want to get into your background, dovetail it into Rob's story that we had, and then start talking about some of the ketone science that we're excited to get into.
Well, thanks, guys. Mike, Ben, we're, big fans, and we've followed you guys for quite a while now. And I think what impresses us is how close you guys try to come to fact versus fiction.
And,
Thank you. There is so much, as you know, in the supplement business, there is a lot more fiction than fact. And so when you get a couple of guys like yourselves who really want to separate that fact from fiction, to me, that's just a pleasant surprise. So thanks for having me on today. This is a treat.
We appreciate it. So yeah, we're going to want to get into the fact versus fiction and your world as well. So, give us some of the facts. Yeah. So what's your background?
I graduated college in some multiple degrees. I have a degree in biology, biochemistry. I have a degree MBA in finance, and I have a accounting degree of which I became a CPA and worked for KPMG out of college. So that's kind of a varied background, but very, very helpful from a business perspective, having both the science perspective as well as the business perspective. And that kind of gives you a way to balance, where should you go? How much should you do? Does this make any sense to do it at all? And it kind of gives a blend of commerciality to, what you're trying to accomplish scientifically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So from a background standpoint, I met Rob a number of years ago in a different enterprise that we were involved in. And after we had sold that enterprise, we said, well, now what do we do? And as we were sitting around kind of messing around with this idea of building Axcess Global, we were really looking at opportunities, any really place we wanted that had almost kind of a gap where there was nothing really there, but could be there, if you will. And Rob had a friend that was involved in the nutraceutical business and introduced him ultimately, and then me, to this whole idea of exogenous ketones. So at first glimpse, it would, going backwards and looking 20 years back at my science degree and pulling it out and taking a look at this ketone thing. And when we initially looked at this, nothing was positive. Everything we saw with ketones was negative. Ketoacidosis, type 1 diabetics, measure your ketone levels to make sure you don't go to the hospital, So when we first started researching this, you couldn't find one positive comment about it, really. And then you had some of the, science curmudgeons like, Dr. Veach, who is, if you've ever met him, he was quite a unique character, but he'd been doing ketone research for a long time. But the guy who convinced me that there was something more to this, even after we met with Dominic D'Agostino out of the University of South Florida, who was really a wealth of information, good guy. I went back and I read this study by George Cahill. And this is a study that if you were to do today, you would be thrown in prison. And this is a classic study where basically he took his students, I think it was 20 or 30 of his students, and he put them on what I call the Jesus trek, where he fasted these people for an unbelievable amount of time and then ultimately gave them a shot of insulin. And you could never get that by an IRB. Hey guys, I want to fast people for about 40 days, and then I want to give them a shot of insulin, see what happens to their blood glucose. And so, but I read that study a couple times, and I said, you know what is interesting is he's right. The body doesn't really require glucose to operate on, even though it operates on it probably more profusely in nature than ketones. But nevertheless, it tells me one factor, and that is that the power of metabolic flexibility, what is that opportunity, right? And this is the one thing that I've seen in my journey. You know, when we first came out, we looked at, oh, well, you're either in ketosis or you're not. You're either in glycosis or ketosis, because endogenously, that's the way it goes. Either the body is switched on to this or switched off to that. But the introduction of exogenous ketones, and this is kind of an interesting thought to talk about, is what could happen if you could administer both fuels and have the body use both fuels in a dual fuel state, in a fed glucose state. What could ketones do? And nobody had really explored that. I mean, we're talking a 8-9-year-old science here of what can you do with ketones in a glucose fed state. So that is, to me, the antithesis of either one or the other. It's the synergy of both that intrigues me. And those people who go into really, really deep ketosis, there's a trifecta. There's the ability to use fatty acids directly at the same time you're using ketones, at the same time you're using glucose, glycogen. I mean, what an interesting physiological era we've entered into, gentlemen. This is science, as we live day to day. So all of these areas of longevity, these areas of disease conditions and inflammation, all of these start to make sense when you're able to use a regimen of multiple fuels to deal with multiple conditions.
And so lots of go in here. Let me kind of back things up a little bit, but first off, it is incredible that we've come such a long way, because 15 years ago, it was like ketoacidosis and that was it. So this has happened fast.
That's right.
People didn't even believe, they thought you would literally die if you didn't have carbohydrates. That's where we were. And I think things swung towards the keto diet, of course. And now we're coming back to a more reasonable area, but with a lot more knowledge in tow, knowing that, okay, these ketones that your body can generate when you are depleted of exogenous glucose, these ketones that your body creates are kind of cool. It's an alternative fuel source. It's got some benefits of its own, especially for the brain. So it's exciting. Now, I don't want to necessarily have a diet with 80% fat and eat coconut oil bombs and whatever else you got to do to maintain this insanity level of ketosis, though. And so, Ben and I, and Ben especially, that we enjoy our carbohydrates, So, and I think with our demographic, there's a lot of performance data on carbohydrates. It's impossible to argue that stuff. So, but it's also impossible to argue how good ketones feel too. And so we're interested in this dual rocket fuel that we call it. And so, yeah, it's great to see that we've come a long way. We're going to have to cite the George Cahill studies in the blog. We've never done that or never cited them before, but man, it's crazy. How people, you would have expected people to have died, but it's not how it works. The body is incredibly, adaptive, and it shows that, we've been able to survive some crazy stuff. and especially not having a lot of food over winters and stuff. So it's
Yeah.
really, yeah, we'll have to cite that. Now, do you have any research? Is your research going in the direction of actual talking about or looking at glucose fed individuals or but with ketones? Is that kind of like where you want to steer things in at this point?
Well, that's great. We are doing a lot of different things. I think the first thing we really want to explore is what is, yeah, and there's a lot of discussion out there about, okay, well, there's a number of different exogenous ketones, okay, or exogenous ketone precursors. Okay, so if you look at the 1,3-butane-diols, which is a precursor, it's not a ketone. Okay, you look at an MCT, that's a precursor as well to a ketone. Then you take a look at some of the uh, mono and diesters of BHB, which we call ketones, but they also have a 1,3-butane-diol backbone, if you will, to its composition. And then you have BHB, the actual acid. Okay, that is actually what the body produces itself endogenously. Okay, so we're here with our little mojo meters, taking one and measuring this and taking another, measuring that, and we're thinking, oh wow, well this is going higher, or this is going longer, or this is what makes a difference. So one of the things we did is we did two studies that I think you guys will find fascinating, and I'm getting ready to launch those out to the public here. The first one was, hey, what do those things really look like in the blood? And if we gave an equivalent millimole dose of each of these components or these substrates, and so we decided, hey, we'll test the popular ones: 1,3-butane-diol, bhb acid, and a bhb diester. Okay, what happens? So when we delivered that millimole dose to some, 26 or 30 mice to get a really good sampling of that, what we found is, yep, they'll have different peaks, which is what now everybody is calling something important. But what we found that's even more important is what we call area under the curve. That means that is the total amount of blood ketones that you really are getting delivered. Okay. And with equivalent millimole doses, what we found is the bhb and the bhb diesters very, very equivalent. The 1,3-butane-diol a little bit lower in terms of how many ketones does that generate in the blood when you take the same millimole dose. So for all intents and purposes, let's just call that equivalency, shall we? Now let me take you to a more interesting study, and then we can kind of batter this one around. So that's the question of how much do you get with your mojo meter and how many ketones do you have in your blood circulating around. Now keep in mind, blood circulating ketones mean nothing. It's just in your blood. It isn't in your cell, right? It's just sitting there floating around in your blood till it's used. So we said, well, what does it cost us to get there? So nobody's really said, hey, how do I take this through the liver to the blood? So when I take an exogenous ketone, it passes through your digestive system, it's absorbed, goes to the liver, and lo and behold, you get your bhb pumped out into your blood. And then we measure it with our little mojo meter, okay? But what does it cost to get there?
Mm-hmm.
So we thought that would be a really fascinating study. So we took about 8 different precursors and bhb substrates and substances, and we decided to figure out how much ATP it took to convert to get there. And lo and behold, there's a cost to conversion. And so what we found is the true test is what cost and what delivered ATP in 2-hour period of time as your liver processed and converted this to actual bhb that dropped into your blood that you measure with your meter. Okay. That study will be really fascinating because there are some dramatic differences in conversion costs. So when we're talking cellular ATP, how much did it cost to get there? It's like, hey, when we all entered onto the toll road, we're all there, we got our cars and we're there, we're the ketones in the blood, right? But what did it take you to get through the toll booth? And so this study is the first one done on the cost of conversion through the ketogenesis process to get that substrate into your blood.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, that's going to be really cool to know. So if you look at the actual the chemical reactions and everything, are there multiple steps where ATP is plucked off or whatever? Is that kind of like, I know you're looking at, so you kind of have an idea. Okay, this is cool because off topic a little bit, but I had theorized the same thing when we were discussing NAD creation, synthesis, how NMN is one step closer and you're going to use less ATP because every time you go from, like, if you go from niacin nicotinic acid, it takes up 2 ATP molecules. If you go from NR to get to NAD, it takes up 2 ATP molecules. But if you're closer to the source with NMN, it's just 1 ATP molecule. So this is my, like, I'm not a biochemist, I'll call it bro thinking or whatever, but my thinking was, okay, if I can get to the same result, I need to get this coenzyme that works on a zillion different, biochemical reactions here. If I can get to it without as much ATP spent, I have conserved energy, and therefore I should have more energy by using it as opposed to one of the competitors. So is that assumption kind of close to what you're kind of thinking with bhb and ketones?
Dead
on. Okay. And am I close? So is there anything else to add to that? But that's the idea.
Yeah, because the thing I think the thing you have to add to it, which is interesting, is, okay, well, the liver or any other organ, it's not just going to sit there and go, oh, okay, I think I'll just suffer the deficit.
Right.
Hey, right? Oh, I'm going to be minus 10. So it's going to take ATP from something else to get it replenished. This is what people, it's a vacuum. So when the liver is working, and this is what is so cool about the human body loves homeostasis. It is a homeostasis hog, right? When something happens, it wants to get back to neutral. It wants to get back to its comfort zone, okay? So if you're going to steal ATP in the liver to convert bhb, it's going to grab it from something else. It may be grabbing it from your glucose stores, but it's going to get it from somewhere, okay? So what it really says is, what's the net ATP? That's really how you have to look at what you're talking about, from NAD, and NMN. All of those things have a cost. What's the net? That's really how you really have to take a look at this entire ketogenesis process, as well as the glycolysis process, as well as, nicotinamide processes, if you really want to take a look at that. Everything has a cost to get somewhere or do something. So all we decided to do is, hey, nobody's looking backwards with all these BHB substrates, let's look backwards. What did it cost to get here?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the study is going to be.
That's really cool. Okay, so it seems like you're still in the mode of, and this is more of a business question, I guess, but we're in the mode of like kind of looking at competitors, really. Like you believe in BHB as an alternative fuel, I'll just say, and you could rephrase that in your own words if you want. Whereas a lot of people are still using a lot of MCT, for instance, and you're saying actually, if you're using MCT, that's a precursor and your body's going to have to do work elsewhere in order to get this same effect, and you're going a little bit backwards, one step back, two steps forward, instead of just two steps forward. Is that kind of like
exactly right?
Okay. And so
yeah, because if you take a look at it, it's all the same when it gets to the blood. You are converting everything to bhb. bhb is the currency that generates the ATP in your cells. It's not MCT floating into your mitochondria. Right? It's not 1,3-butane does not float into your cellular membranes of your mitochondria. It's not happening like that. It's converting to the currency the mitochondria are using, and that is bhb, and that's what's going to be converted to actual cellular ATP.
Very cool. So you've mentioned the BHB acid. So a lot of the like the Vault Energy drink has the BHB free acid in it, maybe a little bit of potassium BHB. In that study, are you measuring any of the ketone salts, the BHB salts as well? Like if I have sodium BHB or calcium or magnesium BHB, is there I assume there is a little bit more work to get that cleaved off, or are you just like kind of going all in with the free acid?
Well, the good news is, as you guys probably already know, the BHB salts are simply ionically bonded. Okay. Well, the good news of that is that the reason that you make a salt is simply to stabilize the bhb acid. Mm-hmm. And so once they enter the stomach, once they are dissolved, the hydrogens in the water will simply separate the salts from the acid, and there you got free bhb acid, no cost to that. That just simply happens as a chemical reaction, no ATP required. So BHB salts, for the purpose of the discussion, are literally the same as BHB acid. It's just now I have an electrolyte and I have an acid versus I now have just acid. Okay. But the key is the substrate you want through all of this process is the acid. That's the same thing that happens with a diester, right? Diester, you get two BHBs that drop off. Then you get 1,3-butanediol that does now have to be converted. So there's a cost to that. Mm-hmm. Okay, very much in the similar cost as, say, MCT. If you take MCT, it's a triglyceride. It has to be broken down and then has to go through the ketogenesis process, delivers this, takes ATP to get there. Finally converts into the substrate the cells can use. Mm-hmm. Make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, with MCT, like, yeah, it seems like if I use MCT in like when I need an oil application, like chicken dipping sauce, I have some recipes with it, but I'm not. But when talking about MCT, even the C8 chain, it might be really quickly metabolized, but the liver still has to do work. Like if you have, in my opinion, this is kind of something I've kind of like come along with over the last year or so, then talking about on the podcast, but like every new thing you add to your body is going to give your liver something to work on. So yep. I prefer to keep things simple a lot of times. And even if it's as simple as MCT, your liver still has to do something. And that's like one extra thing it maybe like didn't want to do rather than break it down its own liver fat or something. So that's
great way to say it. Yeah, perfect. I mean, that really is the reason we did the study, is what does it cost to get there?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the toll going through the toll booth? You know, a really good analogy to that is crude oil. You pump a lot of crude oil out of the ground, right? Well, you're not going to put crude oil into your automobile.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to convert crude oil into gasoline, and you're going to even further distinguish it between high octane, low octane, whatever the case may be. But there's a cost to refining the crude oil into those products. It's the same here.
Okay,
So,
so Ben,
sorry.
Ben, your
No, I
turn.
mean, I think we've discussed very exhaustively the cost portion. I guess my question, a lot of listeners or viewers who are still getting used to ketones are going to ask, okay, like we got it out of the way at the beginning. This isn't about keto anymore. This isn't about dieting. What what are the actual performative benefits that I will feel using ketones? Can we talk a little bit about the data you guys have on the actual performance of the ingredients?
Sure. I could talk about another, 8 hours on that. Um, what is so very interesting about BHB? Let's just talk of that as a alternative energy source beyond. There's other aspects to that we can talk to about in terms of molecular signaling, if you want to delve into that as well. But from the thing that I look at from BHB is that it's maybe the most efficient energy source the body has to deal with. Okay. Its ability to create ATP cellularly, given the amount of oxygen it requires to do so, there's no other fuel as efficient as BHB. So you're getting this really highly efficient energy that for some reason has this immense efficient or immense affinity for the brain and the central nervous system and some of your critical organs like the heart and the kidneys. Okay, just seems to want to travel there. So whenever you take exogenous BHBs, the first place it's going to want to go, or the first place that the body wants to take it, is the brain. And so when you take exogenous ketones, boy, you just feel different. And I've now been taking exogenous ketones for about 8 or 9 years, and I also do kind of a low carb diet. So I've got kind of a good combination going there. Keto dieting is so difficult. I even struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not call myself a keto dieter, but I would call myself a low carb dieter for sure. Okay. But
Mm-hmm.
what I notice is the uptake of the ketones doesn't matter based on whether I'm carb fed or not carb fed. And that to me says, wow, I've got two completely different transport mechanisms working here. Why not take advantage of both? So the thing that I see that I feel the mental aspects of BHB supplementation, even more than I feel the physical aspects of that, with the exception of inflammation. There's a substantial reduction, I feel, of inflammation. And I would challenge anybody, hey, take BHB steady for one single month. See how that makes you feel, and then go off it for 2 days and see how you feel. That is, the absence of something tells you the presence of it.
Yeah, I agree with that metric for sure. You could definitely, you notice when there's a fall off, like some ingredients. I'm never gonna get huge, big guy, whatever, but I could tell I'm like way more sore when I don't take a certain like amino acid, for instance. So I'm definitely, and yeah, ketones have that drop off too. You're like, like you're kind of
Oh,
sad that
yeah,
you're
they
out of
do.
it. Mm-hmm.
So one of the other things, Ben, let me address the other thing that I'm really, really interested in. I'm interested in ROS. And so for listeners, that's reactive oxygen species. That's basically kind of the byproduct of cellular respiration, if you will. And so what ROS really is that you've now created during that cellular respiration, you've created this high energy oxygen molecule, O1, and that sucker can damage your cells faster than anything else in your body.
Are you
Okay.
talking about singlet oxygen?
Yep. Singlet state oxygen.
Okay. Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of different terms for that. Like we call them oxidants, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to take your beta carotene to see if it will quench you know, as an antioxidant, right? Well, antioxidants really are based on trying to get rid of singlet state oxygen. So this is back to the benefits of bhb. Wouldn't it be great to not produce them? So you know, even though I think glucose is a fantastic fast twitch fuel, it's also a dirty fuel. It creates about 46 times the singlet state oxygen in its cellular respiration cycle as bhb. So if you're thinking about it, I like to look at the environment kind of the same way as I look at the body. So if you're burning a lot of fossil fuel, you're getting a lot of power from that, you know, as opposed to your solar fuels and your thermal fuels and, you know, your new hydrogen reactors that's taken 45 years to create and still haven't done. But we could talk about that forever. But the interesting part about it is when you create the carbon dioxide into the environment, it sticks around. We're now seeing a lot of science showing that a lot of ROS that people are producing is sticking around. And this is the whole concept about what do we have to do as far as autophagy. How do we get rid of it? How do we get that ROS out of the cells? Well, back to Ben's question. Well, why don't we just not create it? How's that for an idea? So when you have a clean fuel like bhb, you just don't create it.
So I guess my question becomes, I love the alternative fuel because Mike and I are on opposite ends of that. I was a heavy carb user. Mike was a keto dieter, and we met in the middle now where we fuel with both fuel types. But my question is, if we're going to talk about it as an alternative fuel, how much ketones are you consuming every single day? Because I consume 300 plus grams of carbs. As much as I love your product, it's way too expensive for me to eat 300 grams of ketones a day. So
yeah, I was gonna say that's a lot of calories we're talking about here.
Yeah, like because that's my problem with where the argument eventually goes is like it's an awesome alternative fuel and like something I like to add in. I use it very frequently. But when we talk about it as an alternative, where we're talking about like not creating these oxidatives at all, like that's very difficult to do while remaining on a budget and a normal diet as well.
Well, let's talk about the body. The body has the capability per day of producing in full-blown ketogenic dieting state to where we're doing everything perfect. Okay, about 130 grams of bhb. That's pretty much going to power your entire fuel system. So if you're having the 300 calories based on your carb diet, right, you can actually get a lot more from that ketone fuel source, you know, in terms of actual cellular ATP generation. There's a lot of digestion and processes to get those carbs into a position where you can take advantage of those, right? But what I'm doing, I would say I do about 25 to 30 grams a day of bhb.
And I think that's super reasonable as someone who understands and appreciates ketones. Like I think that a lot of people discount how how much you would feel that 25 to 30 grams of ketones. Like that's a great dosage that I'm waiting on some sample powder from Bonnie so that I can add in a little bit into my life. But I can imagine how different that feels as a fuel, taking in that much a day.
I'll tell you what, here's the interesting aspects of it. We can talk, but when you never feel hungry, okay, because BHB is a super appetite suppressant. You guys know that already, okay? And most people know that, from the keto diet. That's why you do a keto diet is you get ketones. It's like, hey, you say to somebody, hey, have you ever heard of ketones? No. You ever heard of a keto diet? Oh yeah, no problem. I've heard of the keto diet all the time. Well, why do you think you're in a keto diet? To lose weight? No, it's actually to generate ketones for fuel. And it's what you're generating, those ketones go right to the hippocampus and say, hey, don't eat. I'm going to suppress ghrelin. I'm going to suppress insulin. I'm going to suppress that glucose process, right? Well, one of the things that really comes out of here that's kind of exciting, right, out of the of BHB, beyond the appetite suppression, is that everybody I think I've talked to agrees, if you're not hungry, you're going to make better choices of food you eat than when you are starving. So you improve your dietary process just by taking BHB. Because if you're not hungry, then what are you doing? You're now making a cognitive decision about what should I eat? Well, I think Twinkies. That's probably not the first thought of somebody making a cognitive food decision. So all of a sudden you get this mental clarity state. And you guys have experienced that, where you are into full multi-processing. You're into the ability to concentrate and focus. And it just seems like everything is much clearer and easier. I call it, and when they describe being in a glucose fed state as you have that brain fog, that is true. I don't, anybody who's taken exogenous ketones for some period of time will tell you that, or somebody who's been into a deep keto diet, they will always tell you that brain fog issue. But by taking 30 grams of ketones a day, wow, you just don't have that inflammation. You just don't have that brain fog. You have that multitasking wizardry to yourself, and you're not hungry. So
I have a different experience personally, but I love ketones being added in a fed state, like you were mentioning at the beginning of this. Like being someone that still consumes carbohydrates, but adding in ketones is like double rocket fuel. Like I feel like superhuman when I add them in. But I also, I'm not the average American. I probably think that you are right that the average American consumes very dirty sources of food. And I think that is one distinction where the keto diet helped a lot of people, because a lot of people don't have the fortitude to actually eat like sweet potatoes and rice and like clean carbohydrates, fruits. Most people are buying McDonald's French fries, and absolutely, like I could not agree
100%.
more there.
100%. That is so true.
I'll definitely disagree with the multitasking thing. I'm not allowed to multitask in the house. Things might end up getting burnt down. No matter how smart I become, it's one thing at a time. But no, I definitely, and that was one thing I learned is, fasting definitely helps induce more ketones. And I am focused when I fast, but I also wither away a little bit too much. So I personally be careful with that, and don't go too hard in the paint there, because it's hard for me to put muscle on and easy to lose it. And so fasting is a great way for me to lose it without a little bit of supplemental help. That's where ketones might actually help play a role. But I definitely am more with Ben with I'm taking my carbs. I'm not going back as far as like keto goes. I'll have periods of low carbonness and everything. But yeah, I think Americans have like overall decided that we like our carbohydrates, but now we've had this taste of something good out there. So like, how can we have that taste? And I think you're able to provide it, which is really cool. When you're doing 25 to 30 grams of BHB per day, what's the schedule like? Like on this podcast, Joey has mentioned, for instance, that he loves ketones. Joey Savage, I'm talking about, mentions that he likes ketones, especially when he's done with caffeine, like 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever. You don't want to have any more caffeine, want a little more energy. That's a great time to have BHB. But that's just like one instance use case. Like, how are you scheduling 25 to 30 grams?
Well, I have a coffee here, right? In my coffee, I have chocolate ketone powder. So I kind of create a mocha for myself, and that's really pretty tasty. So in the morning, I'll do a coffee and a chocolate ketone. So that's already shot you at 10 grams of BHB. Okay. Lunch, there's no question, Vault is the headliner there. And also in the afternoon, at that point, I'll also do either a stick pack. Now, my favorite flavor is black cherry, so there's no doubt why we have black cherry Vault and why we have black cherry stick packs, right? Now, Vanessa, my life partner, she loves the watermelon more than anything. But a pack, a stick pack, a Vault, and a chocolate in your coffee, you're done. That's it.
Gotcha.
As simple as that.
Okay, cool. So yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay, so when the keto diet supplements first started coming out, we're gonna have a couple things to cover here, but a lot of them were the DL mixes, and now we've kind of gone more to the D, but we've also talked a little bit about L with Rob Rogers on the podcast. So I want to get into the differences between the DR and then the L isomers, but before that, so when we had those mixed racemic blends of the ketones, a lot of people said that you were in ketosis. Like, people are checking their urine ketone sticks and they were showing ketones obviously coming out in the pee. Is there like verifiable proof that it is making it to the brain besides the fact that we are feeling it? We're very, very confident that it's getting there. Like you mentioned earlier, and this is why I was thinking, you mentioned earlier that it does get in the blood and everything. Have we confirmed that it is like crossing the blood-brain barrier and all that in the mice?
Yeah, 100%. There's like, 2,000 studies that will, validate that. That's just a biological process that we can easily see that mapped out. But let's go back to your earlier comment. I thought that, yeah. Let's go back to that. I think that's very a great comment. Okay, and let's talk about that for a second. So when people take exogenous ketones, they're essentially just all of a sudden dumping in something their body is not used to seeing. Okay, when people go into a ketogenic diet, they're not all of a sudden going to be, hey, I'm going to stop carbs one day and be in ketosis the next. It's not going to happen.
Right.
Your body requires some machinery to be built up, specifically a whole series of enzymes in order to process the fats properly, convert them to the triglycerides into the ketones for you to be in ketosis. That's going to take a week or two to fully get there. So initially what happens if you take exogenous ketones, Mike, your body's going to go, what's this? So it takes a little bit to build up the enzymatic process in your body. It says, oh yeah, okay, now I'm multi-fueled. I have flexibility. my fuel systems can be multiple. So what happens like now, if I can take my 10 grams of ketones in the morning, I get almost zero reading on a pee stick anymore. Almost zero. Maybe the light pink. I think that's it, right? It's the light. It's not the purple. It's the light pink. But my body is now saying, "Oh, Gary's got a ketone. Let's take it," and it gets shuttled almost immediately. So that's kind of what happens when people take exogenous ketones. Their body gets used to that uptake.
Okay, and then back to the question. So, piggybacking off of the discussion with Rob, and I think this is kind of how we wanted to start, or how the email exchange started on this for this podcast too, is talking about the l-bhb. So we had the mixed L and R, and then everything. If you want to get your like blood ketone levels super high, you're going to use the D/R, and that's going to work really well. But Rob mentioned that there might be some interesting effects if you just take the L alone. Do you have anything to like add to that conversation?
Yeah, the history of L is pretty interesting. When I first started studying ketones, the biggest advantage I had is I didn't know anything. And so you're not necessarily predicating what you discover or learn based on what somebody else is already entrenched in thinking. Okay. So the earlier ketone researchers, the only thing they were researching is the ketogenic diet because there was no such thing as exogenous ketones. True? So they didn't have the advantage of understanding that the enantiomeric aspects, L versus D, okay, really existed, nor did they have a perspective on what the L enantiomer could actually do, because the body doesn't generate much of it, if at all. Okay, so there's a little bit that we've found in mitochondria that seems to be mitochondrial based. Okay, but for the most part, people would disregard it. It's like the ketoacidosis story. When you first started, it was all ketoacidosis. There was no talk about L. It was the disregarded, ugly stepchild of exogenous ketones. True? Isn't that a good first statement? Oh, it's inert. Oh, it's dangerous. It's all this crap.
Yeah, yeah.
So and I don't think most people know this because we kind of kept this to ourselves. Because basically now I own all the intellectual property around L.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to get
So
into that next too.
yeah, that's a fun subject. But nevertheless, when I asked this really very basic question, why would there be an enantiomer of a high energy molecule if in and of itself that enantiomer wasn't valuable? Why would there be that? So I didn't disregard L. I kind of said, wait a minute. It's just like the kid with the pony, the big pile, and it's got to be a pony in there, right? So we did a study back in 2017, or excuse me, 2019, where we radioisotoped L. We really wanted to see whether or not that isotope tagged molecule actually went through cellular respiration, because everybody said it didn't. Well, lo and behold, it did. And in fact, it was fully metabolized. So that was our first glimpse that L was going to be a very important molecule in our life. So we just kind of figured, you know what, maybe the best thing we can do is synthesize it. So we synthesized pure L by itself. Now, Mike, getting back to your question on DL, the reason DL arose is that when you make bhb synthetically, the natural creation of that process, half of it ends up being D and half of it ends up being L. That's just because of the way enantiomers work when they're produced. Mm-hmm. So half of it fall to the left and half of it fall to the right. And that's how you get DL salts or DL acid, which you make into DL salts. Okay. Then to make D, you have to do something a little bit different. If you're going to do it synthetically, you have to add a catalyst that will keep the L enantiomer or keep the D enantiomer down. Or you can do what we do now is we can actually make these naturally by engineering enzymes and have the enzymes actually work in bacteria to create pure D or pure L. So a biosynthetic process is far more efficient than synthetic, and it creates far more purity, and you can selectively decide which enantiomer that you want to create. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
So we just decided, there's something to this L. So we finally synthesized this stuff into an L salt. And the first time we took it, it was like, what is this stuff?
Yeah.
This is like D on steroids. And so, the first time I gave it to Rogers was hilarious. So I give it to him. He goes out of the office and he calls me like 15 minutes later and he goes, "What is this stuff?" And I go, "Why?" And he goes, "Look, I can read road signs I could never read before, and it seems like every freaking color is brighter." And I said, "Oh, wow, that's..." He goes, "No," he says, "I'm serious. It's like my mind is on a different trip." And then a half hour to 45 minutes later, he calls me and he goes, what is this? I'm lifting more now than I've lifted ever. And so as we started to take a look at what could L be, because one of the things we discovered in the 2019 study, L does not metabolize in the same pathways as D at all. It has its own set of biochemical responses and reactions. So we started saying, well, maybe what L is the super signaler. Maybe L has these amazing signaling capabilities. Maybe it's more impactful in the mTOR cycle. Maybe it's more impactful in how it attaches to astrocytes or neurons or what those responses are. But all of that is in the works now for what we want to do for more and more research. Another study that we have not published that we just kind of kept internally is we did a study on neurotransmitters. So we studied how D and how L affect different neurotransmitters. And let me tell you what, they affect them differently. So what we think is going to happen, and this is where we're going to, okay, well, we have this particular ketone, we have this particular ketone, but we filed a whole series of patents around enantiomeric ratioing. What does 80% D and 20% L do versus 20% L and 80% D do? And are there all these conditions? Because you guys know for sure how many different things bhb has now been discovered to be able to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if you can ratio those things? So we now have a whole set of patents around enantiomeric ratioing of D and l-bhb, because we just don't know. I'll give you a great example. I think Rob talked a little bit about MAD disease. You guys remember that?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, here's a great example of what we're talking about together today. So if you have a patient on MAD and you give them pure D, they will not survive. If you give them DL, they survive. Go figure that. You can't say L isn't effective and isn't active. Just that one example. So what other examples are there going to be to enantiomeric ratioing? I think the world is so open to having two knobs that you can turn and saying, wow, I want to do this or I want to do that. But getting back to L, are you guys familiar with the concept of flow?
Yeah, flow state.
Flow state.
Flow states? If I was to
Rob
describe
mentioned
to you,
this in our last podcast. Yeah.
if I was to describe any single thing I've ever had in my life that gets you consistently to that feeling, and the flow state being kind of technically interesting to me, is how would you like to have all of the positives of how you feel and depress the negatives? So how would you like to get rid of all the stress and anxiety at the same time you boost your confidence and your cognitive skills? That's the feeling it gives you. It's sort of like that. I think Rob always describes it as the Bradley Cooper Limitless pill. And without having anything else to describe it as, it's sort of like lowers stress and anxiety and exemplifies confidence and cognitive awareness. So if I think we're sending you some to try, are we not?
Well, we tried some at the Arnold. I believe we did.
Bonnie gave us the free acid when we were podcasting with Joey. I thought that was just the D free acid, though. I'm not sure what we were.
It was.
I don't know.
That was just the
L.
D free acid. That's right.
Okay.
Did we have it at Expo West? Is that what I'm thinking of?
No.
Oh,
L acid has not been delivered to you boys.
Well, what are we waiting for? So I guess that's the business questions here. First, okay, so what's holding us back from launching some products with this? Like, how do we get? Okay, let's say we try and we're like, whoa, this is cool. Like, how do we get from point A of this is cool to point D of we have this in a finished good product? Like, where are we on that process? Because a lot of our listeners, we're in the sports nutrition world. A lot of our listeners are down to give some stuff a go before maybe some of the major brands in Costco are going to do it, for instance. So how do we get from point 100%. A to point D?
All right, so let's go through that. That's a super question. Okay, so right now we are basically doing a very interesting study, very interesting test. We're going to give 30 people L. Okay, so we're going to, and if you guys want to join in, just let Rob know on that. But we're going to give 30 people L acid in the same format that you guys sampled D. So we're going to have a series of tests. We're going to go through this whole thing. And then we're going to do the same thing with the same people with just D acid. We're going to gather that data and we're going to see, what falls out of that. Which way left, which way right, which way up, which way down. And at that point, from a development and production standpoint, we've now engineered the ability, and we're doing the pilot right now, of scaling up L-acid production. So we've now been able to create L-acid biosynthetically. So we're well on our way to being able to ramp that up, and at that point, build both the L-acid, build both the L-salts. So that's coming in the process in just the near future. That's underway. So what we really want to be able to do is give formulators really a pick of how they want to use that. And also we're going to be in discovery process, not only that, but like I said, the rheostat, what does 80-20 do versus 20-80? Let's see what that might bring. So from a business standpoint, our goal is to have the ability to produce and provide L within probably the next 6 to 8 months.
Okay, awesome. So as you mentioned the patents and everything, I got to ask, how many patents do you own? You got a wall of them.
Well, yeah, I keep getting, there's only 21 on this wall.
Okay.
I think we probably are close to 80 now.
Wow. Okay. Now, do you need a patent in terms of just if you already have patents on using bhb as a dietary supplement or something kind of general like that, do you need one for the ratios of 80-20 D, L, all that? What's the...
I have those already.
Right. Why get additional patents just on different ratios and stuff?
Well, the enantiomeric ones cover ratios from 50 to 99%.
Oh, okay.
And they cover them from 48 48 on the other side, right? So you got to have S, and you got to have you have to have D, and you have to have L, right? Mm-hmm. And then that kind of covers the ratio up and down in terms of how you would utilize those. So within that enantiomeric, just the enantiomeric ratio patents, I have about 12 patents on just that.
Man, I definitely don't. Yeah, I guess it does. I guess I'm asking you. You're not a patent attorney, and I'm not either. I was wondering what is that really needed in order to protect your overall bhb business? If someone's got to go through you to get it anyway, what does it matter? What the ratio is? I guess is the...
Well, because it's a new discovery. So anything that requires me to, a new thought process, like DL, for instance, that already had been discovered. But nobody really had ever said, well, wait a minute, what if I don't use DL? What if I either use pure D or pure L, or what if I used ratios in between? That would be a new idea that is patentable, and so we patented it.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So so when you come to new discoveries, you oftentimes get a patent. Are you going to be getting? Do you do patents for use cases as well? Let's say using l-bhb as a nootropic supplement or anything. Do you have to go that far, or do you get a patent for specific claims as well, or do you just...
Great question. If we have a little bit more time, I can talk about patents themselves for a second. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the patent world is really based on pretty much three major classes of patents, okay? The king of the road is a composition patent, okay? And let me explain what that means. It means that if I put this and this together and I describe a composition of something I've put together, it doesn't matter what Ben uses it for, he infringes. Okay, so composition patents are the king of the road. All right. Then you come down to the next class, a method patent. So if Ben put something together and said, hey, this is to use because I want to cure cancer. I've put these three things together to cure cancer. That's a method patent because I'm using these to apply that as a method against treatment of cancer. So although that's a very valuable patent, it's not as valuable as a composition patent that says, I don't care why you're using it, Ben, you're infringing, okay? In this particular case, I'd have to say, well, hey, I can put these three things together, but I only have to use it for cancer. That's a method patent, okay? Then you get to a little bit more tricky one called a process patent. So here would be a process patent. Hey, this is the way I make my bhb. So I have a very specific way of making my bhb, but those are the easiest ones to get around because all Ben has to do is change a couple of small things or a few things in that way he makes it to get to the same result, and now he doesn't infringe. So one of the things that when I started out with this patent portfolio, I said, you know what? I want every patent we can do to be composition patent if possible. Now, are they the hardest ones to get granted? 100%. Because you're basically saying, if I put this together, it doesn't matter what you use it for. So in this case, I would say 90+% of the patents we have are composition patents. So why this is valuable is as follows. You guys know the supplement business probably even better than I do. But there's a lot of people in this business who are, let's say, not noteworthy. Okay. And so what we really wanted to do is create an opportunity for not only ourselves, but people who really wanted to advance the science and technology of bhb to help human cause. How are you going to do that if you don't keep the people who are not interested in that goal out? So patents are kind of an interesting doorway to allowing people who you want in your club in and keeping the people you don't want in your club out. And so what we really want to do is create a really cool opportunity for those people who really want to advance that concept and really use bhb for what it's meant to. And we want to keep out those people who are just going to try to make a nickel or make $1 off that and essentially make claims that aren't true. So that's the reason that our portfolio is so big and so strong is keep out the people who shouldn't be in and help the people who should be in protect the fact that they're in. And that was the goal of building such a robust portfolio. And I think Rob mentioned to you before, the enforcement aspects of a patent portfolio are just as important as the portfolio. So if you're not willing to defend your house, right, then what good is a house? So we are absolutely terrifyingly aggressive in infringement protection. And rightfully so, because the people who are buying BHB from us deserve that protection from the portfolio that we've built for them. And that's the way we approach it. So everybody in the house, they're our family. Everybody outside the house is our enemy. And that's just the way we perceive it.
The enforcement and the
What's
protection, I
that?
think, means a lot in this industry. We've had, I'd say that the enforcement and the protection means a lot to people in this industry. A lot of brands are purchasing ingredients and just utilizing them, but are not able to join a club per se, right? Like I think that that's really powerful, and I'm expecting over the next year, when people start to see the draw towards ketones, hopefully to see less of like the keto cult that I think really dominated ketones in the past, and more innovators on the front end of this. I think that we're going to see a lot of that. So I'm excited for that.
That's a great comment. We agree 100% with that philosophy. BHB got kind of lost in the shuffle of the keto diet, the keto science, right? That's it, sort of that fad that kind of came through. Ketogenic diets are really great. I'm not disparaging that. I think it's just very difficult to maintain that. And
Right.
so, but I'm more intrigued with what I started with, and you guys are already practicing, is what can ketones do in a fed state? Why all of the keto research on a ketogenic diet is in a deprived state. What can it do in a fed state? I think there's a brilliant opportunity here for innovators. I think the science of bhb is at the ground level of what we can ultimately do with this.
I would say that Mike
So
and I are obsessed about that kind of thought process. The ketones in a fed state, like I've been adding them for a bit in a fed state. I think there are a lot of opportunities forward from there, and I think that athletes of all different sports and disciplines are going to really benefit from that thought process.
Yeah,
well,
my personal.
Go ahead,
on.
Mike.
Sorry, we're a little bit out of sync. Okay, well, so I was gonna say my personal like complaint. I love that you're getting a lot of research. You're looking at like the cost of energy, which I obviously find that fascinating. Comparing against like competitive molecules, like I don't care about any of that. I understand the bhb thing. I want to start seeing research personally in terms of performance. Like if we give guys a bunch of let's just say we give someone 55 grams of glucose, or we give them 45 grams of glucose but 10 grams of bhb, or whatever the equivalent calories are to keep the calories adjusted, so it'd be a little different. Can we see a difference? And like post workout cognitive decline, can we see better focus, better reaction times? I think we would be able to. Do we see any endurance benefits or VO2 max? Like all these different parameters. That's the kind of research that like we want to see here in sports nutrition. Of course, knowing that the world is bigger than sports nutrition. Obviously, like anti-aging and the boomer generation getting older, all that stuff's probably where like the real money is. But we find ourselves the tip of the spear in sports nutrition, so we want to see like some crazy studies in terms of performance. So that's just my hope personally.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Performance. One of the things that's interesting about performance is timing. Would you not agree? Half hour off of something versus an hour on something. I mean, when you're talking performance, you're talking narrow windows of activity. So whatever you're formulating has to be so precise, not only in what it consists of, but how it times out. So I see a lot of interesting formulations where the ingredients in it sounds intriguing, but you know what? They don't time with each other. Oh, this one actually is at its peak in 92 minutes. Well, this one's on its peak at 22 minutes. How do those work together if you want to get peak performance? Well, they don't. So there's not just the ingredients that have to be considered. It's when do you deploy the ingredient in relationship to the other ingredients. And so these are some of the thoughts we're having is how do we formulate glucose substrates, ketone substrates, even some kinds of fatty acid substrates to actually give us a desired result. You know, not just hey, let's throw them into the jar and let's hope they work. So we're excited about what you just said, Mike, 150%. But by being able to administer ketones and glucose in a fed state, give you every option for timing. Didn't have that before. And not only timing, but what if I needed to add more of one versus another? We just talked about that, right? You need 5 grams of this and 10 grams of that, or 2 grams of this and 4 grams of this. We are entering an era that sports nutrition has never seen before because they get to use ketones and glucose together for the first time. Don't you think this is exciting time?
Yeah, I definitely want to play with not just different amounts and timings, I guess. But I also want to play with the L for sure. So what when you mentioned like 90 minutes, maybe that was just an example. Does the energy produced from ketones, I probably should know this, but the peak is slower than glucose then? Is that kind of what's happening, or do you know around where things peak?
You know, it's different. It's like I would say, let's just use kind of maybe a easier thing to understand. Like fast twitch muscle, I think there's nothing like the burn of glucose for a fast twitch muscle. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if you were to map a 2-hour period of performance time, how much time uses fast twitch, how much time uses endurance muscle, and how much time is recovery, right?
Right.
What are those intervals, and how do I preserve the fast twitch energy for the fast twitch times, and how do I map against the recovery time when I need the recovery time, and how do I do the endurance time with the endurance substrate? How do I do that? Because right now you can burn up, if you're just glucose fed, correct? You're going to use all your glycogen regardless of what you're doing, right? 100%.
Yep.
But in a ketone, glucose, fatty acid fed environment, what if the ketones help spare the fast twitch fuel? It provides the energy for all the endurance spots during that. I like football from a to use the football analogy, right? The actual number of actual minutes of play is how many? I think I read this, like in a 60-minute game, how many actual minutes of play are they? Wasn't it like 11 or 12 or something like that, right?
Yeah, probably something like that, yeah.
But I'll tell you what, during that 12 minutes, it's pretty powerful time. Okay, I think everybody's workout looks like that anyway. You are not using fast twitch muscle contractions for 2 straight hours. Would we agree?
That's a good point. I agree with that.
Yes.
So what happens if you're using multiple fuels during that period of time in sequence? to where during fast twitch, you're using fast twitch energy. During endurance, you're using endurance energy. During recovery, you're using recovery energy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be the super athlete, the super performance opportunity coming up.
Okay. Yeah, we're seeing. Yeah, you explained what we're seeing in a different way, and I like that because it gives us more stuff to think on. Very exciting. And then, if in the football analogy, could be good for preventing CTI. I don't want to make claims or anything, but like concussions are a problem, and having additional brain fuel can never be a big problem. So it would be cool to see this on like every athletic trainer's shelves in all the NFL teams and all the college sports teams and all that stuff in case something were to happen. But it'd be great to be drinking it beforehand too. So a lot of cool applications that we can definitely come up with for sure. So it is exciting.
Well, and it's the unique chemistry of bhb that allows for some of that to actually happen, because the readiness and availability of bhb to cross blood-brain barriers regardless of trauma. How important is that during TBI?
Right.
And I think that you're starting to see, it's like you have your TBI kit on board already. Mm-hmm. How's that? I mean, why not load? So when I'm playing a really hard tennis match, I developed a dual fuel product for myself. So by set number 3, nobody kept up with me. Nobody. They were done. So this is where I think sports nutrition is going to go, is engineering energies. Because that's really what you need during performance, isn't it? I mean, we're all talking energy here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, if I can use the right energy at the right spot in the right configuration, I'm going to beat you.
We definitely agree with you. I mean, I've been using it in a lot of different training. I know Mike's used it for years. Mike's a swimmer, so probably a little bit closer to tennis. But yeah, absolutely with you on that. I don't think that people understand how much it affects performance yet. I think that the masses are still kind of they're new to this. So
in the dark a bit.
I have a couple applications that I'm excited about. I mean, I actually came to this podcast straight from a call of a formula that we're including ketones in it. I see the direction that it's going this year. So I'm super excited. And I think that this podcast can help a lot of people understand it. So thank you.
Yeah, we're going to kick some of those doors down. And this, like Ben said, this podcast will definitely help. I'm up about, I guess my time window a little bit right here, but is there anything else you'd like to add or anything? Ways of following you? I'm not sure if you're active on LinkedIn or anything like that.
I'm not that active on social media. It does take a lot of time. And I still have another wall to fill, and that takes an awful lot of time, because you got to research what you're talking about and doing. The last thing that we might talk about, even though I know you guys are really entrenched in the performance segment, but a lot of people right now are concerned about longevity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I thought if we could talk 5 or 6 minutes about longevity, it might be helpful for some of your listeners.
Definitely.
So I have an interesting thought about longevity I wanted to toss out there, and at some point perhaps we can talk about it some other time. And we can either talk about it on a podcast, or we can talk about it individually, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But here's my thought about longevity. The one thing that doing all the research and doing all the patents around bhb has taught me is this: the most important organelle in the human body is the mitochondria. It is the organelle that produces all of the cellular energy we need to stay alive. And with the proper respect for the mitochondria, I, I am not sure how much emphasis has been placed but needs to be placed on mitochondrial energy. And so here's my view of aging. We do know from scientific discovery that when you're 25 years old versus when you're 65 years old, the efficiency of mitochondrial cells drops. Now, that's just science, right? We already know that to be the case. The second thing we know, the number of mitochondria you have at 25 versus 65 also drops. So we know mitochondrial throughput from both efficiency as well as numbers drops significantly. It's not just a single graph, it's a multiple graph. So you may be suffering 40 to 50% difference in mitochondrial capability between 25 and 65. You're not going to survive that. So one of my goals is very simple. How do I turn them back on? And how do I help you get more of them? Because I'm telling you, if I can proliferate mitochondria and I can make mitochondria more efficient, I can help every human being stay alive and healthier longer. Because at the end of the day, it is all about ATP. It is all about cellular energy. It's all about being able to fuel what we want to accomplish. It's all about energy. That's kind of how we started our relationship. We wanted to talk about energy. And bhb is pure energy. How can we take all of the aspects of fuel, all the aspects of glucose, all the aspects of ketones, all the aspects of fatty acids? How do we come up with a recipe that maximizes and optimizes this fuel set? But I'll tell you one thing. There should never be a performance product produced that doesn't have bhb, because you might as well just limp on one leg. And now that we have the ability to have ketones and glucose in a fed state, why aren't we in every aspect of our life having it? It's like saying, well, okay, I'm really good at being just left-handed. I don't want the other arm. I'm sorry. That's where we are here. This is the discussion today I'm having with you two guys. And you guys are insightful and you guys are on top of it. So I don't want to miss out on a day that I don't have bhb and glucose every day in my life.
Do you think that there's an optimal ratio per meal, or is it per day, or I know that you don't have the data yet, but in your life, like how have you anecdotally found this to be most efficient?
Well, here's what a great question. That is such a super question. Optimization is the most difficult concept in science. Would we agree?
I would agree that on paper it is the most difficult thing, but I think that people like yourself or ourselves, like, we have an intuitive way of, like, when we use it daily. I imagine after 8 to 9 years of it, you probably have a pretty good idea for yourself.
I really do. This is such a great question. So here's my thought. Every day and I'll throw this back at you guys because I think you'll go, oh man, that is so true. I don't have the same day every day. What happens to me every day, I'll have a real high performance day of athletics. I'll have one day of acute mental focus, like with you guys right now, right? Every day is different. Some days and this is where I'm going with L and D, some days I need more physical energy. Some days I need a lot more mental signaling. So I'm now capable of splitting D and L based on what those needs might be. Glucose. If I'm going to go play tennis, believe me, I'm using my special Gary brand of dual fuel. Okay? And I'll just tell you, watch out for the third set.
Are you gonna have a patent on that Gary fuel? Is that ratio gonna be patented too?
Dual fuel, yeah. I think you guys will enjoy going down the road with us and seeing where can we take these concepts of dual fuel, of enantiomerically and ratioed ketones, in how do we bridge the timing on what we want to construct from a performance, before, it's like right now we one thing that I am designing is like a short white paper on what I call the performance stack. And that's the whole idea of what do you do before, what do you do during, and what do you do after. Those aren't the same thing. So
I look forward to that white paper. Please
go
send it
ahead.
to us when it's out.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, you guys will review it. But, at the end of the day, would you not agree it's all about energy? Your best days of your life is when you have high energy and when you feel on top of your game, and whether that's physically, mentally, or both.
Yeah,
It's all about energy.
totally.
And so my concept, guys, is what can I do to help generate more energy for you on a day-to-day basis? If I can do that, I've made a mark in the world, and the world's a better place to do it. So Rob and I have this goal of how do we optimize helping people obtain the highest degree of energy in their lifetime. I think that solves a lot of problems.
Totally agreed. I totally agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's obviously an energy sad because there's like low energy people. There's an energy deficiency, despite the fact that we all like societally have an energy surplus. Like things are broken. This is definitely a tool that could be used, I think, to fix a lot of things. So I'm excited that you're going down this road, and we're hoping that we're gonna get some cool things. And in the meantime, we get to play with the performance aspect, which is where we like to go. Like, yeah,
100%.
can we compete better? And then if we can, then we can translate that into can normal people live better? That's kind of where I'm going.
So let me my deep dedication to this is kind of based on a little story, if I could share with you guys.
Yeah.
Early on when we started this, and this was back in 2016, this happened to me. Okay. So I was taking back then, because we just didn't have any staff. So I was handling customer service calls. I was handling patent development. I was handling formulation. So every hat you could possibly wear, I'm wearing. And so, you know how you end up having notional ideas of things that aren't true? And you get those aha moments when you discover whatever you thought was stupid. So I had one of those aha moments, and and not that that was the first or the last, but in this particular case, it changed my idiom towards my focus of what I wanted to accomplish with this opportunity I've been given. And so I'm on the phone with a gentleman, and he said to me, he goes, Gary, he says, I've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue. And he said, I can't believe the ridicule I get from people because they believe the answer to chronic fatigue is just get my ass off the couch, go to the gym and work out hard, and you won't have chronic fatigue anymore. And he goes, how many people, how many people believe that all people have to do to lose weight or to feel better or whatever they have to do is just get their ass off the couch? And I'm thinking to myself, well, God, that's what I believe. And I'm sitting there listening to this guy talk to me, and I'm thinking, God, I believe this. What he's saying is what I believe. That was my belief. Like, oh, you're overweight. All you have to do is get off that couch and go exercise. Okay? And so many people, well, you're lazy. Just get off the couch and go exercise. Just get up and do something. Go active. Go for a walk. Go on a hike. I had the same belief. And I'm listening to this guy, and he says, let me pose a question to you that might change your mind. And I said, okay. And he says, let me pose to you, Gary, this question. What if you can't get off the couch? What if you do not have the energy to get off the couch? What do you do then? So from that day forward, I said to Rob, our job is to help people get off the couch.
I love it. Now, I'm going to give me 1 second here. Sorry, had a muting issue. So I normally, I've kind of gone along the same wavelengths. I never like to blame obese people because I know that a lot of basically just poison has been thrown in our direction, and I don't think I don't like the fat people shaming or the hate that a lot of them get, because I don't think anyone ever really wants to be obese. And it's something that I heard from Dr. Tro, low carb doctor, who's my friend. I've been on his podcast, and listening to him say that changed the way I see it. So no, I don't think anyone wants to be in that low energy state. The way I see it is that a lot of the people that are in extremely low energy states, though, are extraordinarily toxic with something, and that adding. And so one of the solutions that a lot of people do is that they go to the doctor to add more stuff, to add more pharmaceuticals, which are more toxic. And so we throw more pain at the liver for like short-term gains, long-term consequences. And in general, when people say, I want to add more to the system in order to combat this problem, I'm like, actually, I think that I think the solution is actually subtractive. And so that's where I've kind of like come to butt heads a little bit with the dietary supplement industry, because we are an additive industry. However, I think with bhb and what you're doing, I think that's the one exception, or one of the few exceptions to the rule, not the only exception, because there's also minerals and stuff too, which actually you dabble in. But I think that bhb is a major exception to the rule, because it is the energy itself, and it takes minimal processing. We're not throwing a bunch of pharmaceutical drugs at the liver for the liver to have to metabolize and do first pass, second pass, all this nonsense, which is ultimately going to suck more energy out of the system. You're actually providing more energy. So if you were like almost anyone else, I would totally be like, I don't agree with you. But given what you are selling in the bhb, I'm like 100% on board with that. I think it definitely is an incredible tool. I still think that people have to like get rid of what's, it's a long slog, of eliminating toxicities. But I might have to take this, but at the same time, I love what you're doing.
If you think about it, BHB is the ultimate macronutrient.
I agree with that thought process, and I definitely feel it. I guess my question to you is, do you think it'll ever be economically feasible to really get like large amounts of this? Because
Yeah,
you think
I do.
that your work is going to bring it to a point where people could possibly eat like 100 grams of this if they needed to?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, what is so interesting though is that have you tried a regimen of 25 to 30 grams a day?
No, I would say the highest I've gone is 15 grams.
Okay, bump it up. Okay, so I want you to try for a week what it feels like to be on 30 grams of BHB a day.
Gary, I'm sorry. I think Ben just got booted.
Yeah, Ben asked the question, do I ever conceive that it's going to be possible for the average person to be able to get and take 30 grams or 50 grams of BHB a day?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, absolutely. I mean, the ultimate ways that we end up finding to make BHB, the process will be that the price will keep coming down and down and down. And one of the points you were making is you don't feel the same way about BHB as you do some of the other little micronutrient supplement stuff that you get along the way.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I said to Ben, the reason that BHB is so incredible is that it is the highest level of macronutrient there is. That's its advantage over every other thing, is that it is the ultimate macronutrient. And how do you displace that with anything else?
Mm-hmm. I'm really excited for the new applications that we're going to be throwing down here. It's
thank you,
it's
Mike.
good to see this done properly.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has. I appreciate it, and we'll be in touch. And anytime you have a new study, I think our audience is okay if you say something was internal, it's not peer reviewed. We will say that, but we're happy to broadcast some of these messages. We obviously want everything to get published, and that's expensive and time consuming. But yeah, when there's new glimmers of information, we'd love to get it out there and see what people think. And Ben's coming in just as I'm closing out. Ben, I was saying that we're always excited to bring the information out, even if it's like internal data. And as long as we can disclaim that, hey, this was internal, but here's an idea for someone. Maybe you could use it in this nootropic application or whatever it may be. We're down to bring out some of the information because, yeah, we do feel good on this stuff.
Okay. If that's the case, yes, I would be happy to. We just completed a study on BHB and HMB.
Oh, cool. Interesting.
Wow.
So that is right in your charter for performance.
Yeah, it is.
That's super interesting. That's even more post even thinking than pre. That's interesting. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Don't leave us out. Yeah.
I won't. I'm probably about 3 or 4 weeks from a preliminary draft. I'll share with you guys.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.